Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 137. So, over the weekend, I went antiquing with Kat because she wanted to go antiquing with her friends because she loves it. And while we were out, we stopped by this little, this weird, it was a toy store. I think it's supposed to be a chain, but it was so strange. The location was holed up in this unmarked building with a door that had I don't know what it was, tape or some sort of plaster over the door. There was a paper, at most there was a paper sign taped next to it to even denote that it was a business. And we walked in and we were the only people in there, and it was just like 1,000 Funko Pops and one guy at the cash register. It was really strange. So it wasn't just Funko Pops. It was a bunch of other collectibles. It was more of a collectibles kind of store than it was a toy store. You know, it's like things you put on your shelf. And surprisingly, Kat actually was curious about these little Kid Robot branded they're like these little boxes with random figurines in them from various different, whatever license they've gone with. They actually had a couple different Street Fighter ones. She wanted the Street Fighter V one because she wanted one of the ladies. She wanted Chun-Li or Cammy or Karin or Mika or Lauren, which I think were the ones that were the ladies included. And she ended up getting two. And we opened them in the car. And the first one she got was, I actually don't even remember it was Ken. And she was like, okay. Ken's fine. I like Ken in this game. And the other one was she opens it up, and there's always one mystery. There's always one mystery figure in the lineup. They have on the back, they show you, on the back of the box, they're these tiny little boxes. They show you which are in the collection and what their rarities are. And there's always one that's a mystery one. You don't know what it is, and you don't know what its rarity is. So she opens it, and it's the mystery one. It's not on it's not on the back. It's like a blacked out shadow. And it's Necalli. And I was laughing my ass off because it's I frequently forget that Necalli exists. I think most people do. And that's when I realized I took another look at the collection of all the SF, because this was a Street Fighter V specific series that they did. And I looked at it and I realized, wait, this is launch Street Fighter V. That's why those are the ones that are on offer. So we pull it out. And it's sitting on my shelf because she didn't really care that much for it. I thought it was funny because it was Necalli. And I'm looking at him, and there's this weird decay on part of the plastic or the whatever they're made out of, vinyl? I don't know. And PVC, I don't know what they're made out of. There's this weird decay on the material where it's kind of white and a little scratchy and stuff, and the colors are kind of a little bit smeared in certain places. And the thing is, this was in a box, right? This was in a box, and then it was in a sealed bag inside of the box. This thing it's never been opened, right? This isn't a used good. It's just been, this had to have been from the launch of SF5. So it's been rotting in a box for 8 years, 9 years at least, 16 to now. Yeah, about 8 years. Which I just think that's really funny. Yeah, in any event, some exciting things happened last week, but I can't tell you about them because they will likely be up on the channel sometime soon. But look forward to something cool and stuff. Steam Next Fest happened this week, and well, I guess last week if you're listening to it, because this will be up on Monday. So I was actually surprised. I tried to find the schedule for how often they do it, because the last one was back in October. I'm not complaining, because I really liked it. And I found some gems this time around, but I'll get to them in like the back half of this episode or whatever. Before that, I want to talk about some other stuff that happened. Namely, Capcom sent out... We've got 2 Capcom things. First up, Capcom sent out this survey. They have this website. You could take a survey of feedback, because it's like an anniversary or something. I don't know. And it was actually like a pretty cute website. It was like a whole Capcom festival with all their characters and images, and it was not just like a Google form survey. There was a lot of effort put into it. And it's basically like, hey, what do you want us to make? Which is nice. I don't know exactly how substantial this kind of thing is going to be, but just in case, I basically stacked all of my answers to be Megaman oriented. I haven't talked about Megaman in a while, but Megaman, unironically, is one of my favorite things. Just, like, because of this survey, I got pulled into a whole like Megaman thought theory rabbit hole of just thinking about Mega Man again. And there was one particular question. So first of all, a couple of them were pretty funny. They seemed fairly in tune with whoever decided the wording of the questions and the answers kind of knew what they were doing. Because one of them was like, what's your biggest complaint with Capcom as a company? And it was things like, reboot old IPs already, which is the one that I clicked on. One of them was like too money-oriented, which I thought was funny. It was stuff like that. Relatively lighthearted. There was one question that I found really interesting, which was, hey, if you could pick an old Capcom series for us to do a remake of, what would it be? And there was a couple options that were kind of interesting, but the one that really grabbed me was the Mega Man 1 through 3 option. Not just Mega Man, like the original, or Mega Man 2 or something, but Mega Man 1 through 3 specifically, which I think is pretty interesting. They did, most of the other answers were kind of like that. I might have even clicked on like... I actually don't think I went with the Mega Man answer for this one. I think I clicked on like Demon's Crest. Because Demon's Crest is so cool. But I thought about it and I was like, you know what, actually? Because my first reaction was, you don't need to remake Mega Man 1 again. You already did that in like 2000 and... When did Powered Up come out? Was that like... Mega Man Powered Up? That wasn't 2009, was it? 2006. Wow, that's a lot earlier than I thought it was. On the PSP, you already remade Mega Man 1 on the PSP. I'm like, you don't have to sell me another Mega Man remake, right? But then I thought about it and I was like, actually, because this isn't just the first game, it's the first 3. And there are things that you could do to improve those games that don't even really require you to change that much. Like stuff that could potentially be fixed with something like a ROM hack. For instance, Mega Man 2. The first ever video on my channel was about Mega Man 2 and how I think it has more flaws than people tend to acknowledge. And I still stand by basically everything I said in that video, and I think that a lot of the later Mega Man games are actually a lot better designed than 2, but I was thinking about it and I was like, so one of the big problems with that game is, so from my perspective, and this is like, you can like different things about Mega Man, right? But I have things that I like about the series, and one of the things, my favorite thing is the variety and the usage of all the special weapons. To me, that's like the main hook of the series, is you defeat a boss and then you steal its power. I think that's super cool, and it's really unique, and that usually gets people interested when you mention that to them. So, like, one of the reasons Mega Man 6 is one of my favorite is my favorite of the classic series and one of my favorites of the entire franchise is because the weapon design is really well balanced. All of them fill different uses. They have different properties, directions they go, areas of the screen that they cover, different utility. There's no truly bad weapon. Plant shield is fine, or plant barrier. It's fine. But like, especially once you get to the last half of the game, the castle stages, and I just find myself constantly switching between weapons to deal with different situations. And there's a couple, because there is so much flexibility in the arsenal, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach certain situations. You know, do you want to shield something? Do you want to use the silver tomahawk? That's the one that goes upwards. You can use like Nightman's like boomerang mace thing in a certain way. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you can actually do with it. And to me, that kind of like open toolbox of options available to the player honestly shaped a lot of my taste in games. And that's one of the things that I find kind of disappointing about Mega Man 2 is that there are neat weapons in that game. I really like Air Shooter, for instance. But they literally all just get obliterated by Metal Blade. Metal Blade is just way too good, and I don't even want to have to explain why it's the most broken thing in the entire franchise. It's already been well tread on. You can go back and watch that old video of mine. Probably has bad audio and all that. But yeah, in order to Metal Blade makes it's like almost laughable how strong, how overpowered it is. And to me, that makes the game kind of boring. Like, that takes away a big part of what I find fun about the Mega Man games. And you have to, like, dedicate yourself to doing, like, basically a challenge run to use the Metal Blade as little as possible. Which basically means just never using it. Because it is the best possible option in almost every single situation in the game. So if you just don't use the Metal Blade, and you have to use the rest of the weapons, it can be fun, although there's other things holding it back. Namely, and this is where, okay, if you were going to do a Mega Man 2 remake, this is what I would say are like prime things, is you have to fix the weapon balance to make the game a lot more, in my opinion, a lot more fun. And that means, number one, balancing Metal Blade in some way. Put actually some kind of limitation on it, or it's literally just the master of all in terms of range, energy efficiency, damage, places on the screen that it can cover, like literally everything. And it has an infinite energy exploit, which is like so funny. Like, oh yeah, also you can just never run out of energy at all if you're using the Metal Blade kind of thing. To make it even more broken. So balance it in some way. I don't know how, but in some way. Make it cost more, give it a more limited range, some kind of different behavior. I don't know. The other thing is that you need to adjust the enemy weakness tables. So a lot of people don't know this. Most people are familiar with the fact that all the bosses in Mega Man games have unique weaknesses to all of the different weapons, right? So they're all weak. It's like a rock, paper, scissors. And that's why there's certain boss orders where you get one boss's weakness weapon and then, go through the order, go through the chain, right? Most people don't know that actually applies to every single enemy in all the games. They all have a table of weapons, like how much damage they take from each weapon. And one of the issues with 2 is that the tables like don't make a lot of sense and are also, again, heavily skewed towards Metal Blade. So there's situations where, for instance, like Bubble Lead is only useful like twice. It's only useful in like 2 screens of the game. I guess not counting like the final boss. But there's situations where you feel like it should be useful and it's just not, because it doesn't do any damage to the enemies. And it leads to like kind of annoying situations where you're like, oh, should I just use Metal Blade? Yeah, I should just use Metal Blade. stuff like that really hampers the game, because there are like neat things that you can do with having all the different, enemy weaknesses to the various weapons. And there are interesting kind of strategies that you can form as a player if you know that they are weak to certain weapons. But the game just isn't, again, like you can really tell in certain ways that it was made on their off time. It was a game that was made as basically a hobby, like a passion project by the team, and they just didn't have the time to really fine tune things. There's a lot of stuff that you could polish up in that regard. You could do the same for all three of those first three games, that first original trilogy. 2, I think, probably needs it the most. Although 3, I'd have to go replay 3 and actually like do a more like comprehensive personal breakdown of that game. 3's, I feel like its biggest problem has always been like the weird padding in that second half with the Doc Robot stages. That's something that you could improve. You could make those a lot more interesting and actual, unique stages in some kind of way. I think you can keep Doc Robot. You keep him in some capacity because he is a part of the game, and I think you should preserve that in a remake. Hey, another thing to fix about Mega Man 2, that fucking Boo Beam trap. It's called the Boo Beam trap. It's the one where you have to use the crash bombers, and unless you go in with literally full ammo for your crash bombers and you don't miss a single shot, you literally can't finish it, because you need every single shot to destroy all of the walls in the right order and destroy the traps, like the turrets. And the game suffers from that probably wouldn't happen in a remake, but in the original, there's like awful slowdown and sprite flickering that makes it like, oh god, it's one of the worst bosses in the series, in my opinion. But there are genuinely a lot of things that you could do to improve those games, and I read some comments about this survey, which mentioned basically saying that, like, Capcom can absolutely, there's so much appeal to be found in Mega Man, but Capcom just has to like commit to giving the series some like time, like for people to get to know it or be introduced to it, like actual jumping on points. Like 11, I thought 11 was actually really good. I thought 11 was a really good game, but it wasn't gonna like get that many people really into the series. Number 1, it's called Mega Man 11. And number 2, it just wasn't that big of a production. Mega Man games usually aren't. I think you would need to do something a little bigger, a bigger scope project than just a single Mega Man game, which generally are pretty short, kind of sweet experiences. And something like a remake of like, it's actually 3 games, I think could be a decent jumping on point to be like, hey, you don't know shit about Mega Man, because like if you think about it, Mega Man 11 came out in 2017. It's been like 7 or 8 years since then. If you were in the first grade when that game came out, you're now going into high school, and there has never been a mainline Mega Man game released in all of that time to make everyone feel old here, including me. And Mega Man, right? Like I think everyone can enjoy Mega Man, but it is a series that is primarily marketed towards kids, and you kind of, if you're going to make one, you're going to be marketing it towards a younger audience, and you have to like introduce the character to them in some way. They were able to do this with the Resident Evil remakes really effectively, not so much to like a younger audience, but to a new target, the same target audience, but new people, Like RE7 came out and everyone was actually really stoked on that. I'm like, whoa, they actually like kind of figured it out and they made like a really cool game. And then the RE2 remake comes out after that. And I think that remake was really good at getting new people in, because like, I've kind of heard, Leon's in this game. Okay. Well, I know who Leon is, but like, this is kind of like where his story kind of begins and all that. So it's a slightly, it doesn't have the weight of a number 7 or 8 on it. But it's like, oh, 2 remake. Things are probably going to be a little simpler in terms of what I'm expected to know. And it's introductions to a lot of these characters and concepts and locations. And it helps that the game was good. That helps. I think you could do something like that with those first couple Mega Man games. You could do that to the first 3. You could do that to 4 through 6. I think 4 through 6 needed less. 1 through 3 could benefit from like a brushing up. I think you could see that in Powered Up, where it's like, oh, okay. I actually don't think Powered Up changed that much gameplay wise, besides like adding some new content, new characters, playable characters. That's all great stuff to include in a remake. You could also throw that in. Oh, that would be perfect for 3. You could unlock Proto Man. Yeah, that would be great. It doesn't quite make sense for him to be in Mega Man 1 yet. But to like make like these, it would also, the other thing is that it's very doable. Like on that survey, some of those other remakes was like Onimusha 1, 2, and 3, and you're like, that seems like a lot of work. Mega Man games have historically been pretty cheap to make, and with a quick turnaround time. Like they put those things out on the yearly, and we're mostly reusing, well, for the first 3 games, reusing kind of like a lot of the same technology, and just, like practically making like just using a level editor to make the new games. You could, I think you wouldn't need like an RE2 remake sized budget to do like a decent remake of those first 3. What would you do if you were to remake like 4 through 6? I don't know. You could probably rebalance 5 a little bit. 5 has some, in my opinion, I think 5... Actually, you could... That's another thing. You could also go back and polish 5 up a bit. 5 has... I don't think it's bad at all. I don't think any of those games are actually bad. 5, my problem has always been that like the weapons... Again, the weapon balancing is really, really off. A lot of them are just kind of bad and not very useful. A lot of them fulfill the same functions. There's like half of them travel along the floor, and that's what they do. Rush slide? Rush slide? Power slide. That's what they call it. Charge Man. Charge slide? Is that what it's called? What the fuck is it called? The shitty slide. It is so bad. It's so bad. You never use it. Power Stone, that's the one I'm thinking of. Stone Man's weapon. That one's bad and hard to use. A lot of the weapons just suffer from being kind of hard to use and not that useful. Trying to think of ones that are even like that good in that game. I guess Wave Man's is fine. Napalm Man's is fine. Although again, they do kind of the same thing. You could do some fixing up with that roster. The Mega Man Maker actually already implemented at least one, like in one of the first builds of that game that was released. They made it so that you could use the charge slide, the power, whatever the fuck it is, charge slide, I think, in the air as a mobility option to get like an air dash. That's actually cool. That's a cool idea that you could implement. Yeah. And then you just kind of made the charge buster shot. That's the other thing. The weapons aren't very good, and the charge shot is really good. It's the strongest it ever was. They balanced it to be a little smaller in 6, and I think that's like perfect for it. But in 5, it just fucking blows through everything. Also, maybe like toned down. It's so weird. In 5, you just get dumped with extra lives. They just throw so many on you. It's like noticeably more than the other games. Personally, I think 6 is like perfectly balanced. That's my creme de la crop. Some people will disagree with that, but I think appreciation for 6 has gone up a lot in recent years, especially among like the Mega Man online community kind of thing. Yeah, I would be down for that. I would actually be really down for a cool remake of those first 3 games to kind of test the waters. I think you could you could easily, yeah, I think that would be actually a really good way to kind of sell and like keep going, because Powered Up was supposed to be a series. They were going to remake all of those games. There were already plans for this. And then I don't know if it just didn't sell that well, or it was just because it was on the PSP, or was it maybe because Inafune left? I have no idea. I'm sure there is a reason for it that might even be publicly known. I don't know about it. Yeah. That's my Megaman spiel out of the way. That would be cool. The other thing, the trailer for Ed finally came out for Street Fighter 6. Now, Ed is a character that I think a lot of people have a bit of a complicated opinion of Ed. When he first came out in 5, he was not very well received. 5 had, it was a series of ups and downs in regards to its newcomers. 6 is probably the smoothest introduction of a bunch of newcomer characters that the series has had in a long time, since like maybe 3. 4 and 5 were a little shaky. There were some really good ones and a lot of ones people did not care for. I don't need Rufus back. I don't need Abel back. The only reason people like Abel is that his gameplay is neat, but as a character, he's the most boring thing ever. Anyway, so Ed had a couple things going against him. Number one, he had a really dumb design in 5. Like, he looks bad. He's over-designed. It's not just a busy design. It's actively over-designed, and there's too much going on. He's a stupid little hat with a tiny little brim that is like angled to cover one of his eyes. It's so stupid looking. They were kind of trying to sell him as like a new kind of like next generation character. He was a replacement body for Bison, one of the like 15 other characters that is a replacement body for Bison. He's supposed to be Balrog's protege, but he's supposed to be a boxer. Like, the concept is cool for Ed, right? Oh, he was raised, he has the psycho power because he was supposed to be a body for M. Bison, so he can channel the psycho power. But he's raised by Balrog, so he's a boxer. He's a boxer who augments his attacks with crazy psycho power energy moves. And the idea is cool, and the execution in 5 was just kind of lackluster. He's not much of a boxer. He has, besides the gloves, which don't even look super like boxing gloves, and he has like literally one boxing move, like boxing style move, which is his flicker jab. That's it. That's like the one move he's got that reflects his boxing style at all. He uses kicks, which is like, there's already a template. There's 2 examples of boxers in the series, Balrog and Dudley, and both of them have a pretty, I would say pretty strong, like, clear gameplay theme, which is they don't use any kicks at all, and their kick buttons are just more punches. But for some reason, Ed actually uses his legs and stuff, which just doesn't feel right. So his theme, like, you look at Ed and you look at him fight and you're not even really sure what he was supposed to be until you, like, actually read into his lore. So kind of like a weak execution. So now we get into 6, and we already know what his concept art looks like, and I was already a lot more positive on his new design. Having seen it, I do really like it. I actually like it significantly more. I'm a fan of, like, just the big jacket with no undershirt and like the gloves and stuff, and the dark pants, which kind of are like the grayish pants. There's a lot of like nice color balancing. I some people aren't super into it. I like it. I dig the style a lot. Also, one of my favorite costume for Ed. Most people, I would say, preferred his like hoodie design in 5. And I get it. That one is, for me, I always thought it was a little bit bland. But my favorite, it was the one where he's in like this silly like big red jacket, but he's not wearing the jacket. It's just draped over his shoulders, and he's got no undershirt on, and like the Shadowloo cap. He looks like a male stripper. It's great. Because I'm a JoJo fan. I thought that one always looked cool. And this one reminds me of, the new design reminds me of that one. So we already knew his design. We knew what he looked like in game, sort of, because they put out a teaser, a little story teaser for him with no gameplay a few weeks ago. Now we got the full gameplay trailer, and it's actually this is a good trailer. It was a pretty substantial if you go and read into it, and then read some of the, like, one of the blog posts they put out on the PlayStation website or something like that. So I'm really digging Ed's new gameplay design. He's basically been completely overhauled to be much more of a boxer character, which is cool because it's an archetype that I've always really enjoyed. If there is a boxing character in a game, I tend to want to play them. Dudley is my favorite Street Fighter character. And that's another concern is, if Ed is here, does that mean that Dudley can't be in the game? Because everyone's wanted Dudley back for a while. I want him back. And that was like a slight concern of mine, even though 5 already had technically 2 boxing characters. 4 and 5 both had 2 boxing characters. 5 had Dudley and Balrog, 4 had Dudley and Balrog. 5 had Ed and Balrog. Although Ed isn't much of a boxer in that game. And having seen his gameplay, I think they could both totally coexist in this game. I'm fine with Balrog getting, like, retired for a game and not showing up, and Ed kind of being his successor. I'm cool with that. Balrog's been in, like, 3 games in a row. It's fine. I think Ed looks really, really cool, and he is I think they can both coexist in this game because Ed's style is very different from how Dudley kind of plays. Dudley's design is entirely focused around the fact that he is incredible above the waist. All of his best moves are all, like, squarely above the waist, and the man's got no lows at all. He does have lows, but they are not, like, he has no low pokes and weird crouching moves, like weird crouching lows. Ed actually does have lows. He actually has some cool looking ones. Here's another reason I like Ed in this, or I like how his gameplay is looking. They just gave him Yamazaki Serpent Slash from KOF, which is sick. I always love characters like that. Ed's, so apparently they didn't, this is actually like in the blog post. Ed's kick buttons, excuse me, are all what they call like these flicker punches, which are essentially, again, it's like a Serpent Slash, like light, medium, heavy kick. He flicks, he does a flick punch upward, straight forward, or downward, and the downward is a low from the looks of it. So that's already different. All of his moves use like the Psycho Power. Why am I blanking for a second on what I wanted to talk about? It seems like he's kind of, they're all of his moves use the Psycho Power and this kind of like seems like he's generally tuned for aggression and rushdown. He has a command dash that he has 2 like follow-ups out of. It's basically a command dash. It seemed like he was relatively safe on a lot of his options. He can actually, it's just cool. He can charge up. They took the cooler stuff from his Street Fighter V incarnation. Namely I think it's called the Psycho Snatcher, which is like the energy Psycho Power tendril ropes that he can create. And he could use it to like grab opponents and fling them and do combos and stuff. That was probably the coolest stuff that he had in 5. And they brought that back as just a part of his moveset where he can charge up his flicker punches. And if he charges them, he gets the Snatcher. They brought back his V-Trigger, the one where he makes the big orb, the big Dark Angel orb. Which was fine. That was like always a utility thing. It's probably going to be his level 2. He seems like he's going to be based very much around aggressive rushdown and kind of like brawling. I don't know what his frame data is going to be like. It's kind of an interesting archetype in this game because typically when I think of like Dudley, for instance, Dudley had really good frame data up close, like on his like forward medium kick and moves like that, which makes him like really scary and opens up all these frame trap situations. 6, I'm curious how they would adapt that part of his gameplay or implement that maybe into Ed's gameplay. Just because 6 is kind of balanced around most things being negative. Whereas before it was, it could be all over it. Something could be +2 or whatever. Like just a random move could be +2. Now, if something's going to be that plus, it's kind of got to be like really specific to the character's kit. There's not a lot of stuff that leaves you at advantage up close. So you have to structure your offense a little differently. Looks like Ed kind of has, maybe they're building that into like he has kind of like a back sway kind of thing, which could be how they're doing that instead of like building up these frame traps, doing like button into back sway and then forward attack, to punish someone who's trying to hit a button, something like that. But overall, he looks pretty cool. I'm actually really interested in trying him just because I like that archetype a lot. And hey, even if Dudley doesn't exist in this game, I'd be happy if we got a cool boxing character. So Ed is looking cool. I really want to check him out now. And it makes me, again, very excited for what they're going to do with future seasons. And also really curious what they're going to do with Akuma. Akuma's always had a very fleshed out kit. He's always had a lot of moves, even in like Street Fighter 2. He always had like a lot of tools for approaching and doing tricky setups. I think that like the demon flip is a really cool move. And I'm curious at how, like, what is he going to get in this game? Because you could maybe take like Street Fighter V Akuma's moveset and not even add anything to it and just kind of port it into 6. And I think it would still be like a relatively complete character. Obviously, integrate some of the V system stuff into his regular moveset as opposed to, this bar that you have to build up. Or something that you have to choose between. Like, that might be it. They might even just be able to do that, and it would be enough, I think, for a lot of people, and just put him in this game with this system and these mechanics, and I think people would be probably relatively happy. But, like, is he going to get something new? What if they did like what if they did like what they did with him in Third Strike? If you don't know, Akuma's special in Street Fighter 3 in that he has no EX moves. He can't use them. But in return, well, number one, his specials are very strong just in general. And he gets access. He doesn't have to choose. He has 3 supers to choose from, but he always has 2 extra ones. He just gets more supers than other characters. And that's a cool way to design a character, I think. I'm curious if he's going to have like more supers than other characters in this game or something, some way to interact with that, because I think that would be neat. Some cool way of him interacting with the drive gauge, because that they never really went back to that idea. I'm trying to think. The only other character that I can think of in like 4 or 5 who even kind of messed with those games like meter systems, the ultra gauge or the super gauge or the V trigger gauge at all. It's like, it's just on the tip of my tongue. Oh, like Luke, SF5 Luke, where his V trigger built up over time as like a weird, I guess, kind of precursor to the drive gauge recovery. I think that's what they were kind of sort of foreshadowing. That's the only other character that I can think of who changed the way that the resource system worked or had a unique interaction with it in a way like that. And I think that's Akuba is, he's kind of a rule-breaking character. I think it would be cool. He's like the series' first super boss, basically. He's a great character to do that with. So, excited. I'm looking forward to that. There's also been some people... So with Ed, there's kind of clamorings about the amount of content in the game and the drip feed of it. People are kind of upset that it's like we just get avatar costumes and that's kind of it. And not as many costumes. Just there's been one set of costumes for every character that they've released since launch, which I think a lot of people are disappointed with, because 5 had a really huge assortment of costumes, and a lot of them are really cool. What I would say, so my reading on that is basically, I think that Capcom way overestimated how much people would care about avatar customization. They clearly wanted to push it as a major part of the game because of the World Tour and the Battle Hub. Because, I mean, if you think about it from their perspective, 2 of the game's major modes / like areas, segments, whatever you want to call it, from the titles that you could select from on the title screen, use your avatar. And I think they were expecting people to be a lot more into customizing them. I think people do like getting avatar costume stuff and earning stuff and buying it and all that. But for the most part, I think a lot of people were most of the enjoyment they got was in just the original customization and making a weird or cool looking character just in the character creator. So I think they sort of, I imagine they're going to readjust because the fan demand for more like actual character costumes has been a lot greater than for avatar costumes. They did like a lot, like if you think about, so I wouldn't expect those changes to happen until season 2 of the game. Generally, the way that these games kind of get budgeted is, you can see it in other fighting games too. Like Guilty Gear, for instance. I think what they had planned was launch plus 2 seasons of content. Which is why they had to like formally announce that season 3 was happening. Because they probably literally had to like sign new contracts. Maybe not contracts, but like do a new plan for continued support. It was launch and then 2 seasons, which is why season 2 ended with Asuka, the big boss character who's been foreshadowed for like the entire franchise at that point. And then afterwards, oh yeah, okay, cool, we'll just do some extra seasons and bring back some fan favorite characters and all that, and Johnny's back and all that. 6, I imagine they have at least, well, because they already had the first season of DLC picked out. If they had the second season picked out before the game was released, we would have probably seen it in the leaks. There would have been concept art. The game's development process was like probably developing the base game plus like finishing half of the work-ish on the DLC characters. And that includes like all the content updates. Like I feel pretty confident in saying that all of the avatar pieces and everything that's come out for the game, including not just the characters, was all basically planned like that, at least that amount of volume. I mean, they did collaborations with a couple different brands. They did a Spy Family one. Those deals, they have to be decided fairly early, like a bit in advance. So that stuff had to all get planned out while the game was still pre-release. If they're going to shift the focus to kind of like turn the knob down on avatar costumes and turn up the knob on character costumes, I would not expect them to do that until season 2. when they readjust. They have to make like an actual readjustment, a new plan. They can't just like change all the plans on the fly. Or they could, but it would probably be really messy. So that's my opinion. That's my read. We watched, so last episode I complained a lot about The Boy and the Heron, and I got at least one comment telling me that it was, in their opinion, I think M said potently mid, which is a potent phrase. And I was actually curious, and I was telling Kat, I want to watch his other movies now. I want to watch at least some of his other movies, just because I can't believe that they're all as bad as I thought Boy and the Heron was. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And she actually owns quite a few of them on DVD. So, the last time I was at her place, we watched Spirited Away, which I haven't seen since, again, I was like 8, and I realized that my memories of it are only 2 scenes, so I essentially haven't watched the movie. I might as well have just seen a trailer for it. And yeah, upon rewatching it, I didn't remember anything about the movie besides those two scenes. One of the last scenes I remember. That one kind of came back to me as it was happening, but other than that, it was all brand new information. So how did I like Spirited Away? I liked it. I wasn't super into it for the first like 2/3, and then I think by the end it really won me over. One thing I noticed pretty quickly is that Miyazaki is not in a hurry to do anything. There is like, I don't know if it's actually 5 minutes, but it feels like 5 minutes spent with Chihiro just in like the boiler room, reacting and making faces at the little soot sprites carrying the coal. That scene goes on for a while. I was like, okay, he wants you to sit back and take it in. You're in a curious wonderland, and Miyazaki is gonna kind of, there's a plot and there's a story going on, but he wants to show you some cool stuff while you're there. And there is like a lot of creativity in this film that never really gets in the way of the story. It either assists the story, or it's just something kind of in the background, or just something that happens in passing. One thing I really tried, I had to like mentally tell myself, don't compare this to the Boy and the Heron, even though the comparisons are, I think a lot of people have already made them, even people who like that movie. There was like one point where I was like, wow, he just like made a shittier version of this movie 20 years later. That's crazy. What was it? I think it was the scene. Oh, it's the scene where Haku gives Chihiro the rice balls. I was like, whoa, this is just like a much more emotionally impactful version of that scene from Boy and the Heron. But I tried not to, and I don't want to just spend this entire segment just shitting on that movie. I'd like to engage with Spirited Away on its own terms, and not films that weren't even a twinkle in the creator's eye when they were made. I can definitely see where all of the love for his movies come from. I think maybe because I'm not a child anymore. It doesn't have, I can see this playing really well to a child audience, because it has so many components that are really interesting for a kid. Recently, I was, I saw this really great video about Shel Silverstein and why his poetry was so like controversial. Apparently in the 80s, there were a lot of parents who wanted to ban Shel Silverstein's books because some of his poems could get, like, some of them were like, oh my god, are you serious? Like, really, you're upset over this? Some of them could get like kind of intense, and I could see where the concern would be. But one of them in particular, there's this poem called Kidnapped, and it's this poem about this this little kid, and they're basically telling the story of how two men, like, what was it? Like, approached them and like kidnapped them, like tied them up and put a blindfold over their eyes and took them to put them in a van. Oh, they lured them into their van with candy and kidnapped them, blindfold them, take them to a basement, chain them up, and guard them with a shotgun and call their parents for ransom. And then the last line of the poem is like, and that's why I was absent from school today. Which is great. And I read one comment that was really interesting. And they were talking about the different way how a child would read a poem like that. Or as a child, they read that poem a lot differently from how adults would read that poem. As a kid, it was really exciting to them because they had never read anything that had that level of like danger or adversity. And a lot of their theory was that a lot of kids look at stuff like that as so when a kid sees a child character in danger, what they see is they're relating to the kid, and they see it as, oh, this is a challenge or a danger to be overcome. Whereas the parent sees it as, oh my God, that's like my child playing in the street. Oh my God, that evokes the same sense as like my kid is going to get hit by a car. And they have two very different readings of it because of their perspectives. So things that are media where kids are in danger or have some kind of more intense obstacles to overcome can be a lot more exciting for a kid and not really quite as troublesome, but a parent will look at that very differently. And that reminds me a lot of what Spirited Away contains, because fairly often Chihiro is in like actual danger, or there's characters in the movie who are in real mortal danger, and there's blood and people get hurt, and there is like some violence. But I think as a kid, they're relating more to Chihiro and rooting for her to figure it out, and rooting for her to solve the problem, or talk to the person and convince them of something, or find some kind of clever way to overcome the obstacle. And the fact that she's all alone, well, not quite all alone. She does have like a couple friends and a couple people who are on her side, but she's kind of doing a lot of stuff on her own. And there's a sort of a sense of danger that I think is really enthralling for a kid, especially in a world that is so foreign and so unique. That's another thing that I liked about this movie, is that it really does remind me a lot of an Alice in Wonderland type thing. I don't know if that was an actual inspiration for Miyazaki, but it's at least the point of reference that I can have, that I can give to it. Which is that, you read something like Alice in Wonderland and everything's weird and there's all sorts of strange rules to the world, but the rules do exist and the characters generally abide by them. And they're used to tell a story about any number of things, There's a lot of ways that you can read into stories that go into a lot more abstract concepts. Spirited Away, at its base, tells like a pretty, I felt like, again, by the end, a pretty compelling emotional story. Again, a little bit meandering and a little bit like there's things going on, but there isn't like a clear path. The goal, Chihiro has a goal, and that is to get her parents back. They've been transformed into pigs, and Chihiro wants to get to turn them back, but you don't really like know how to do that. And she isn't given a direction for the overall goal. It's just, she's given immediate goals, but you're not really sure how those contribute to her overall goal. you see how it all fits together in the end, and how all the whole series of events leads from one thing to another. But at the time watching it, I was like, okay, I mean, this is enjoyable. I'm just not really sure where it's going. Like, what the purpose of this stuff is. Like, this whole big sequence with this, like, mud monster that they have to give a bath to. And I'm like, well, we're spending, like, a lot of time on this. And it's like, what's the thing? And then, okay, she gets a thing and she uses it later. And that experience kind of changes her relationship with what's her name? Yubaba? Which means that Yubaba, like, kind of treats her a little differently. And that leads to this happening. You see how it all fits together in the end. There is a method to it. It isn't just random or aimless, but it does feel a bit like that. But by the end, kind of once everything came together, I really liked it. There's a lot of themes. So, like, Chihiro is a very kind of, I feel like a very standard kind of like fish out of water protagonist, in that she's thrust into this world. She doesn't know what's going on. She has to kind of learn enough about it and to get by and survive while she's trying to work on her own goal, on her own mission. And she's perfectly serviceable in that. She's cute. She's, has a bit of an attitude. She acts like a kid, which I appreciate. She kind of like, she isn't like dumb. She has kind of like a bit, she kind of mopes a little bit. She's happy at certain points. She demonstrates a full range of emotions, and she gets genuinely really upset when things kind of, like, again, like I liked that scene where she's eating the rice balls with Haku, and she feels just like it's like this weird little like private moment between them, and it just gets a little too much for her, and she's been in this weird situation, and she's just kind of like, okay, I gotta get this job at this spirit bathhouse, and all this stuff is happening, and finally she has a chance to slow down a little bit and just kind of like share a moment with someone who is like an actual friend of hers who knows what's going on, and she just like starts crying, and it's like, damn, that is, she has like a whole internal world I'm trying not to relate this to the boy in the heron. But yeah, she's a decent, serviceable protagonist. A lot of the things that happen in the movie are just kind of like fun and inventive and whimsical, and you don't quite know what's happening a lot of the time until you sort of kind of figure out what they're doing, and there's kind of like a magical, dreamlike logic to it, which is fun. Like, how does the magic work? What are Yubaba's powers? It isn't explicitly detailed, but she'll do something, she'll snap her fingers, and something will happen. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess she can kind of do this. She has a giant baby, voiced by Tara Strong. I get the babies, it's a big baby. There's a lot of... So one thing that I appreciated... I don't want to compare this to The Boy and the Heron. I really don't, but it was on my mind. One of my problems with that movie is that there were a lot of people talking about how, oh, it's about like grief or whatever. And that like completely flew over my head. It totally just sailed right past me, because I never really felt like sad watching that movie. I never felt grief. It was, I could tell that the character was sad, but I, as an audience member, wasn't really sold on that emotion. And that's why one of the reasons I call it kind of like emotionless or passionless is I never really got any emotions out of it. And so I never really engaged with the emotional themes that were there. Spirited Away tells a story from beginning to end that is comprehensible, that, yeah, has like fantastical elements, but there's characters and plot beats, and there's a logic to what's going on. And you can use that as a starting point to start reading into it. So I'm not going to claim that I understood absolutely everything that the movie was throwing at me, like on the more subtextual level. But I could see little things. Like there's a lot of instances, for instance, of giving and taking in the movie. So Chihiro's first, so like the inciting incident is that the parents get turned into pigs. They get turned into pigs because all they did was they were eating the food that was meant for the spirits. They were taking without asking. Yubaba takes Chihiro's name and she renames her Sen. And by taking something of Chihiro's, she gains control over her, and Chihiro begins to lose other things. It wasn't just her name that was taken from her. She starts to slowly kind of lose some of her memories, and that's why her having the letter with her name on it to remember her original name is so important. The no face, which that's a classic design. That's a great simple that's a great design for a movie for a children's movie, because a kid can sketch that so easily, right? And it's like kind of creepy, but it's kind of cute. And it isn't like an explicitly scary thing, you know? There's a point where it turns into like a big monster, but that's because it has this kind of weird behavior where it devours things, it takes them, and then it gives people things, and it just showers people with gold, which is this very materialist gift. And then it tries to give gold to Chihiro, and it starts when it tries to give her the tokens for the bathwater, where they can order the bathwater. It gives her like a bunch of tokens because it's something that she wants. And she kind of, what does she do? I think at first she takes one, and then it tries to give her a bunch, and she says, "Sorry, I don't need that right now," or something. And it's kind of confused and maybe even a little put off by it. So it starts giving all this gold to all the denizens of the bathhouse. Then later on, when it finds her again, it tries to give her this huge pile of gold, and she says that she's not interested. She doesn't want it. And that's when it really freaks out and starts like eating people and lashing out. Then later in the movie, after it leaves the bathhouse, it starts like returning to normal and spitting out all the people it ate. And Chihiro says something that she thinks that like being in the bathhouse drives him crazy or something, or it like aggravates him. It turns him into this monster. You get the part where the No Face helps the twin of Yubaba. What does she make? Oh, she makes the little hairband. And the hairband is supposed to represent friendship. Like, she just literally tells her that. And Chihiro accepts it. And then that kind of she basically accepts this gift. It wasn't just like this materialistic, like gold, just money that the No Face was giving her. It's like this symbol base. It's a symbolic gift. It's one that to anyone else might look kind of plain, or they might not even notice it. But the fact that the No Face made it for her is what gives it meaning, and that's kind of gives it this new sense of happiness and lets it stay with the aunt. And that you can. It's like this thing that wants to be accepted. You can kind of like, it has no dialogue, but you can tell just by the way it acts. It's like this spirit that just wants to be accepted. And it tries to give people things in an effort to find that acceptance. And it has to learn this lesson that it can't just randomly give things away. That's not what builds that kind of like that loving connection of that bond that it really desires. It's all just like purely like the relationship it had to all the patrons of the bathhouse was purely just utilitarian. Oh my God, I can just get a bunch of money from this guy. That's how they looked at it. But Chihiro, I think by the end, sees the No-Face as a friend, which is something that it seemingly has never had. And then I want to say that, like, finally, or one of the last things is, I really loved the scene where Chihiro remembers Haku's name. I wasn't expecting it. Because again, like, I liked that last third. I was kind of warming up to it. And in that scene where she remembers his name, she's riding on his back. And she says, I remember your name, it wasn't Haku, it was the Kohaku River. And when I was a littler girl, I fell into the river and I would have drowned, but it carried me to safety. And that was you, and you did that. You're the Kohaku River. And there's like this, when he hears that and like, he just like, whoa, and there's this huge rush and all his scales fly off and he becomes a human again. And it's like this it's just this moment of like elation where he's been given back his name. It wasn't something that he didn't take it from Yubaba. He didn't take his name back from her. He was given it by Chihiro. She gave him his name back because she remembered the act of love that he performed for her when they were basically strangers. And that was like really moving to me. Yeah, like there's a really nice, I wonder if I rewatched it, if I would actually enjoy it even more. Like those first 2/3 of the film. It's like 2 hours long. It's a lot longer than I was expecting. Yeah, there's some really good stuff in that movie. And it makes more sense to me now. The fandom around Miyazaki's work, because I can definitely see watching that as a kid and maybe having a better memory of it than I do, right? And it having a really strong effect on you. I remember watching that and thinking, wow, that's a really cool movie. Excuse me. Oh, and we watched it in English, by the way, which I think was fine. I thought the dub was perfectly good. I don't know, didn't feel like reading subtitles or whatever. I was also curious about the English dub of his movies, because that's how most people experienced it. Maybe I could rewatch it again in Japanese or something. I have no idea. I don't know. Overall, like I get it. I get it a lot more having seen it now. It's just bursting with character and charm. Like every single background character in this movie has merchandise of it. I love the turnip guy, the turnip spirit. I thought he was awesome. I saw him getting off the boat in like one of the first scenes, and I was really like, oh, I love that guy. I love the little squiddy looking guy. I just thought he was a squid face. And then I was expecting him to never show up again, but then he does. I'm like, yeah, turnip guy. I love him. Yeah, a nice emotional story. Just kind of like something a little bit meandering, but I think it pays off in the end. And it's just nice. It's a satisfying movie to watch. And I can definitely see if I was a kid or if I was like a parent watching it with my kid, I think I would have a really good time with it. Better even than I did watching it recently. So yeah, I don't know what other Miyazukers we'll watch after this, but yeah, I was literally telling a friend, and who's a big Miyazaki fan, and they were like giving me the list of which ones I should watch. I was like, all right, I'll get to it, fine. But yeah, Spirited Away gets the thumbs up from me. Well, now it's time to talk about the Steam Next Fest. So if you aren't familiar, you should be. Steam Next Fest is really cool. It is essentially an indie game festival that Steam puts on every, from this looks of it, a couple times a year, where for 1 week, a bunch of indie developers put demos of their upcoming games on Steam, or release new demos if they already, had one out. And then depending on the developer's choice, some of them will It'll only be available for that week, for that 1 week. Some of them I think keep them up, but it's not a given. And so there's like a time limited FOMO element. So I'm here to tell you about 8 games that I checked out, and some of the ones that I thought were worth you checking out, that I would recommend, and what I thought of them. So the first one was a game that I got actually recommended to me on Reddit as just a random, like, hey, check out this game, it's really weird. It's called Indika. 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 This is actually a game out of Kazakhstan, which is pretty interesting. Apparently, the developer was formerly based in Moscow, but for whatever reason, relocated to Kazakhstan. They are a very indie dev. They have 1 game on Steam to their name, and it's a VR game. And as far as I'm concerned, basically every VR game is a tech demo. So this is like a full-on game now. I'm sorry if I'm being condescending. Anyway, Indika. This game is really cool. I liked it a lot. Essentially, Indika, I was drawn by the page because it did look weird. It has a pretty photoreal art style, but there's these kind of flashes of weirdness. The game has this photorealism, but then kind of like weird pixel like voxel type objects for certain gameplay mechanics that like aren't supposed to really be existing in the world. It takes place in the real world. The soundtrack is also kind of like techno-y, like kind of a little chiptune inspired, which is neat. Okay, so let's get into what the game is actually about. So this is a very like narrative, dialogue-driven game with environmental puzzle solving. Yeah, that's how I would describe it. It's a third-person game. You play as okay, so let me just give you the quick plot synopsis because I think you're probably going to be sold on the plot before anything else. The main character is a nun named Indika. It takes place in late 1800s Russia during the winter in the countryside, absolutely snowed in. The main character is a nun who can hear the devil and an escaped convict who can hear God. So Indika is this nun who is, you kind of have to, it starts with both of them passed out in the snow, and they kind of wake up, and they have a motorcycle that's tipped over nearby them, and you kind of piece together from their conversations the events that directly preceded the start of the game. Sort of spoilers. If that premise sounded interesting to you, I would maybe skip to, I don't know, the next segment. The demo doesn't cover it covers it's about an hour long, 40 minutes to an hour long, depending on how long certain puzzles take you, I imagine. But just skip, because I do want to talk about a little bit of the plot, because it did hook me. This game actually has pretty interesting characters. And good voice acting, too, which I'm pleasantly surprised at. I wouldn't necessarily expect a Kazakhstani developer to have been able to source good English voice actors, but they do. It is in English, by the way. I don't know if there's a different dub. I didn't actually check. So basically what you figure out is that Indika and... Oh, who's the other guy? He also had an I name. I'll call him Ivan for now because it's a generic Russian name. So Indika and Ivan were both on this train that was going to wherever. Indika was on the way to a monastery to deliver a letter. And Ivan was a prisoner who I believe was being transported from like a prison to a hospital or vice versa. He has an infected arm. He has an arm with a wound, and it's infected. So he isn't very physically capable. At some point, there was some kind... He took her as a hostage and escaped from the train. And now they're both in this situation in the middle of the winter in the Russian countryside. And they're like, shit, well, all right, we're in the situation now. We got to find some kind of shelter or town or civilization. So there's a lot of back and forth dialogue between the two of them. Again, good performances by both of them. The game has a lot of dark humor, kind of crass humor, but you can tell it's more so that like it's informed by the characters. Ivan is just he just has a kind of like crass sense of humor. He curses more. Indika also has a sense of humor of her own, but they kind of have a good dynamic with each other. She's obviously, she's a nun, so she's a little more interested in, being clean, but their interactions are really charming, and I was always happy when they started talking. I was always I wanted to hear what they would say to each other next and what conversations they would have, because it just really worked for me. So they find this little town that's been completely abandoned. It was a factory town. It was a factory that made paint. Everyone's gone, and it's kind of eerie. The environments have a really nice atmosphere to them. There's a bit where you do some basic puzzle solving. You got to get a wrench to like unscrew a bolt to move this thing out of the way before you can proceed. And you go into to find a wrench. You go into a nearby home. Excuse me. And the detail in this little house is really nice. Like it's pretty like intricate. It's like one room, but there's like a corner, right? There's a corner that has it's this desk with all of this painting and drawing supplies, and there's all these paintings of Jesus but with no eyes. And you're like, huh, that's kind of creepy. And then you kind of you look for another second at the room, and you realize that all over the room are these little sketches of people's eyes. But for some reason, none of the Jesus paintings have them. It's kind of eerie. There is some basic interacting. Oh, there's like a weird it's like sex doll looking thing. It's like this big human-sized wooden doll with a face painted on it that's laying in the bed. Just weird, right? Like, what happened? Who was here? Who was this? I don't know. Will there ever be an answer to that? No clue. There's a lot of pretty simple interaction with the environment. You have these like points that you can build up. I never got to like, okay, so you'll walk into this room, and there's a couple things that you can interact with. You'll be able to pick up, for instance, here's a pendant of a saint or something, and you take that and you earn like 10 points. There's a little like candle shrine to, Saint Mary or something like that. And you can light that, and you'll get some points from that. And then every time you hit a milestone, there's like this little upgrade path where there's essentially like a top row and a bottom row. And the top row of options is stuff like what is it, piety or something? And the bottom one is like shame. And piety will be like the next time you gain a point, like points, there's like a chance that you'll get like a multiplier on it. Whereas the shame one is like, get 30 points right now. I'm not sure what the extent of that system will be. There were only 3 kind of like levels of upgrades, and you pick one for each intersection, right? Or not an intersection. It's 2 different paths, and you pick one for each. Every time you get to that threshold, you just pick one of them. You can't develop both of them, as far as I could tell. There was like a big kind of like hexagon shape at the end of those three watermarks, 3 thresholds. But I never got to that. I don't know if there's actually enough points in the demo for you to reach that. So I don't know where that's going. I'd be curious about it, at least. But generally, there's a lot of little details in the environment. You're kind of encouraged to take your time and look around. And there's usually not that many things to actually like interact with, but at least just checking. And little environmental storytelling things that are just strange. Like you walk into a house at one point to grab something, and there's like all these cradles all over the place. There's all these cradles hanging off the ceiling, all empty, of course. There's no living person in this town that you can tell. There's no people at all. It's completely abandoned. There's no bodies. No idea what happened here. At one point, you get a little further in. There's like this kind of wolf that's sort of chasing you. You have to run away from it at a couple points. And eventually you run into this part of the factory building. You hoist Ivan up out of a window, and then he like takes kind of a bad fall and is injured and can't like pull you back up from the other end. So Indika has to find a different way around. And so you walk up this tower, because I guess it's like built into the side of a cliff or something. So the top of the tower ends up at it'll lead out to the cliff. You walk up this tower, and as you're walking up all alone, you start hearing this voice, this narration, and it's the devil, and the devil is coaxing you to read the letter, and Indika's arguing with him like, no, it's sinful to read someone else's letter. I'm not supposed to. And he's goading her into doing it. And he's playing these little mind games like, well, it can't be that big of a sin, right? Because there is, there's big sins and there's small ones. And let's say opening a letter, he's just messing with her like, how do you quantify what a sin is? What if opening a letter is one sin, right? Well, what would a murder be? Would that be worth like 1,000 sins? What if a mailman opens up 1,000 people's letters? Is he a murderer now? And he's just playing these little games with her. And eventually, once you get to the top of the tower, the door just kind of like opens on its own. And you walk into kind of like this last kind of hallway stretch. Or it's kind of like a larger open area, but there's a door at the end. And Indika decides, fine, okay, whatever, I'll read the letter. She opens it up, and you don't find out what it is, but you find out based off of what the devil then tells you, which is that Indika is delivering this letter, which basically informs the head of the monastery that Indika has been defrocked. Great word. She's been kicked out of the convent. You don't know why. You don't know what she did, or what the circumstances are. But as soon as she finds this out, the devil just starts mocking her and laughing at her. And the world literally flies apart. So you're in this room, and like the walls like pull away and like shatter and explode away apart, and it's like the room is like floating in this red void, right? Like it doesn't even exist in the real world anymore. And the devil's just laughing at you and taunting you, like asking you like, where are you gonna go now, and stuff like that. And here's where I would say the game's other main puzzle mechanic comes in, which is that you can switch between the normal version of the world and the kind of hellish, blown apart version of it, which changes the geometry and the layout of the room so that you can get to the end. That you have to swap between them to get to the end. And you do this by praying. So there is a pray button in this game. Hit the pray button, which I laughed at that when I first saw that. But literally hold down right mouse to pray. And Indika will start praying, and you hear her whispering her prayers, and the world flies back to normal. All the things like shoot back together. So you got to like climb up this thing, like climb up onto a box, then onto a board, walk to the end, stop praying, the world flies apart, now you're over here, but you're like on this, you can kind of drop down to this other thing, start praying again to like shoot back, and now you can walk, walk across this platform that's formed again. You're doing that. It's a really cool mechanic. I really like the way that it's tied into the story and the whole deal with the devil taunting you and all that. But there is like one gripe I have, which is that the devil has this monologue of him taunting you, right? And it's maybe a minute long, and it loops constantly. Excuse me, Jesus. It's always on a loop, which it's fine like the first 2 or even 3 times, but I was stuck in this room for a couple minutes trying to figure out what exactly I was supposed to do, or like where I was supposed to stand, and just kind of trying to get an idea for how to solve it. I mean, it's the first time I've done a puzzle like this in this game, and I'm still kind of like learning how the mechanic works. Listening to that on a loop, because otherwise you have to like just be holding the prayer button down, which only gives you swapping between the 2 versions of the world. Like you kind of have to do that because you have to tell like, okay, plan your route for how it's supposed to work, right? It's useful to be able to look at both versions of the world, but one of them you've got this monologue which you've heard like 10 times already going on in your ear, and it just gets kind of annoying. It wasn't like too bad, but it did get annoying, and in fact I left that bit of feedback. I would at the end survey that they link you to, I was like, my suggestion would just be to have the monologue and then have some kind of like ambient like laughter or a couple like random little like lines that you can pepper in here and there. And then maybe every like 2 or 3 minutes replay the monologue or something like that of time that's passed. If you really want to like have it be a constant thing, but just have it be more of a in the background, because I'm trying to solve a puzzle and I've got this thing kind of bugging me. You know, gets a little on my nerves. I could imagine later in the game that being a problem if they handle all of those puzzles like that, and one of them is particularly tricky to solve. I can imagine myself getting annoyed after pretty quickly. But yeah, it's the demo is, again, it's about 50 minutes long. It ends on an interesting note. There's this, so the wolf model is like really fucked up looking. It is I didn't even know it was supposed to be like a regular wolf, but I thought it was supposed to be a monster. I think it's just that they didn't know how to like model a wolf that well. It doesn't ruin the game at all. It's just something I thought I would mention. It's a really weird looking wolf. It looks like it's made of like Brillo pads or something. What else was I gonna say? It has a great art style. It's a very like white, black, gray, kind of sepia colored game. And it never looks bland. It just looks pale. It's a pale game, but some really beautiful scenes. Like you go into this factory, right? And you're in the kind of the upper level where the light is shining through, and there's these massive gears and this machinery, this huge structure of cogs and pulleys and gears and all that. And you're like walking through, and you got to solve a little puzzle where you do something or other. And the little particles of dust catching the light, and it looks really nice. It's not particularly colorful, but it fits the mood, and it still manages to look really, really gorgeous. Kind of, it's one of those environments that almost kind of stretches the realism, because it's so massive and grand feeling, and it's really good looking. I thought. Yeah, I really dug this demo. I don't think there's anything else that I wanted to say. But Indika, yeah, Indika. You can wishlist it. I did. I am very interested to see how it pans out. I think if they just I mean, if it can deliver on the characters and the story, and they keep it as this kind of interesting small cast of characters dynamic, where you've got, I didn't even mention the whole like listening to God thing, but he basically, because it doesn't go into too much detail, but essentially he tells you that a few weeks ago he heard, excuse me, he had a cup of water, and while he was drinking it, he heard God whisper in his ear and tell him the future of everything that was going to happen. And according to him, everything that God said has come true. So there's this obvious setup of the nun who's supposed to be pure is being tempted by the devil, and like what's her decision going to be, and this convict who is you don't know what he's done, but maybe something bad, but he literally has like an injury that is rotting. Like he has an infection. It's like a very physical symbol. The symbolism's there already in his character, this infection that's weakened him. And he's the one who God chooses to speak to, but not Indika, right? So there's this contrast between them. And I thought it was interesting that one of the items that you pick up to get some points, it's a pendant of Saint Christopher, who I think is one of my favorite saints, just because he is always depicted as having a dog head. He was a cynocephaly, which was like back in the medieval period when people didn't leave their, like, they didn't go beyond, a lot of people didn't leave like a 20-mile radius around their village. People would just be like, hey, did you know there's like a race of dog people? You'd be like, what? And they're like, yeah, one of them's a saint. Well, that's crazy. But yeah, that's, despite being a beast, like it literally tells you in the description of the pendant, despite being like a dog-headed man, being an animal man, he was still able to accept God's grace and become a saint. And so there's these very intentional feeling little points to suggestions of characters being redeemed, potentially characters, having falls. And I think if the story can deliver on that, if it can keep up the great dialogue and dynamic between the two main characters, and just deliver some, again, pretty serviceable environmental puzzles where you're just, not too difficult to figure out, but satisfying nonetheless, I think it could be a really great game. I would definitely keep my eye out for it. Indika. The next one I played was called Sunray OS. So Sunray OS is, I really like the idea. I really like the aesthetic. I wasn't totally sold on the execution. Essentially, the premise of Sunray OS is that you have bought a computer online, and it has this mysterious operating system on it that has been getting some like buzz. There's some rumors about it online because it comes with this AI assistant named Zippy, who is a cartoon mouse, which I feel, he's like a 3D model. I thought it clashed a little bit with I don't know. I wasn't super, I would have maybe designed it to be a little more like clippy. I don't know. It didn't feel, whatever. It's personal, like little art style gripe. But the whole game takes place on like a desktop. You're on this like simulated desktop where you can't go into the files, but you've got like, you can look at the photos, videos, like the regular kind of inbuilt programs, as well as a browser to go to websites that you find out about. There's a messenger. And essentially there's like a mystery involving the previous owner of the computer, who you find out by talking to a friend of his on this messenger who still has like his contact, that they were both investigating the weird AI Zippy. Okay. Ooh, okay, something strange has happened. So it's a neat concept. I like games that use the framing of, I talked about it with like Progress Bar. I love the aesthetic and the concept of using an operating system and the kind of the trappings of that, but adapting them to like gameplay mechanics. And the concept of solving a mystery by investigating the contents of a computer is really cool to me because I use computers. And I wasn't bad, but I will say that the execution, it didn't entirely sell me on its execution. That's what I would say. The game feels, what's in the demo feels kind of railroaded, which I was a little bit disappointed with. It's mostly being told to go to a certain thing or do a certain thing, as opposed to me figuring it out organically by exploring the computer. And it just kind of felt like I was being directed by the character that I was talking to like, oh, do this, now do this, go to this website, go to and like, you are doing things that are kind of neat. Like, you copy this URL that he sends you and then go to your browser and then search for it. And you go to it, go to the website and then navigate through the website and find the program that you're supposed to download. But it when I explain it like that, it feels, I don't know, like you have a lot of agency, but you are mostly just being kind of directed and instructed to do things without a lot of like input on your part. It could be that this demo is just meant to be kind of a tutorial section or a setup to introduce you to the kinds of things that you can do, because you do basically use every part of the computer. From what I can tell, I imagine there's more stuff that you stumble upon as you go, but you use basically like every piece of software that's on there. You do you use the browser. You solve a couple puzzles. There's like one real puzzle in the game, which was neat. It's okay. So this is a game where you will be expected to pull out your phone to scan a QR code to solve a puzzle, which definitely feels like I can feel the inspiration from ARGs and stuff like that. So in this case, you uncover a picture of a QR code. I scanned it with my phone and I got a riddle that I'm supposed to solve that is the password to a website that you find. And that was like near the end of the demo. And it was like, okay, that's cool. I would like more stuff like that. To me, like the idea of like, solving a mystery by searching through a computer is, I'm thinking of like all the cool stuff you could do with that, with searching through file directories and hidden options, programs and stuff that like you don't know what to use, or a file type that you need a specific software to use, but you don't know what kind. Or something that's encrypted and there's clues hidden somewhere else. These are like, I can just rapid fire spitball concepts for a game like this, and those might very well happen in this game. And that's why I would at least say like maybe keep an eye on it. I don't think I'm entirely sold on Sunray OS yet, but the idea is promising. So I'll leave it at that. What did I play after that? I played a game called Arcticide. Arcticide, like homicide. So this is not a typical kind of game that I would play. It's a survival game. I would describe it as being a survival rogue. It's more like a roguelike with survival elements in it. So it uses a low poly, crunchy pixel texture art style, which I like, and I like games that look like that, along with a whole host of survival mechanics, probably closer to something like Escape from Tarkov or H1Z1 than it is like Ark or Minecraft. There is like a crafting system in the game. There are guns, there are random drops and stuff. Essentially, you start out in an area, you get some like supplies from a guy. You always start out in the same little zone where there's a guy who's on the ground dying, and he gives you some supplies. I feel really stupid because I didn't realize that it was actually like a box that I could open to get stuff out of. So I did like 3 or 4 runs basically naked through the game, and it was like, wow, this game is hard. Yes, taking that stuff is very useful. I was basically doing a challenge run of the game without knowing it. And then you have an option to go to one of 2. There's a fork in the road, and you have the option to go to one of 2 different zones, which are more like themes because the layouts are procedurally generated, and you can really tell. You can really tell that they are procedurally generated. The generation is a little bit messy, where there will just be kind of random geography. Buildings won't have a very coherent layout. Like, it's 2 stories, but there's no stairs, which is weird. Stuff does feel kind of randomly scattered around. You're always going in the same direction. Your goal is always to head north, which you'll get to the end of the map, and somewhere northward is like a hatch to get to the next area or something like that. The exit to get to the next area. With the goal of getting to like a computer to send a distress signal, and that's like the end of your run. It's okay. It's fine. That's how I would describe it, as being fine. I can't really assess how good the survival mechanics are because I'm not very familiar with this genre of survival game that it's doing. I can definitely see this being up somebody's alley. It also has multiplayer support, which is cool. It didn't super grab me. Could be because I'm not that much into the gameplay loop, but also, I don't know. There wasn't that much that felt super special about it. The survival mechanics felt kind of basic. You can grab stuff and then craft it and then use it. Like, you can grab berries to make medicines. You can find guns. There's enemies a lot. The game loves spawning enemies on rooftops. That just makes it a pain in the ass to navigate. It's definitely a game where you want to get away from other human beings as much as possible. There's survival mechanics like hunger, thirst, energy, and stuff like that. The UI is a little basic, but it's serviceable. Just not super interesting. I liked the aesthetic and what I saw on the store page, but the actual gameplay was a little, it was a little mediocre in my opinion. Now, that could be because I'm not the target audience for it, but if it is something that sounds more up your alley, like, oh, I do like these kind of intense survival shooters, and the roguelike aspect sounds intriguing to you, you can check it out. I did end up finishing a run on easy mode. Easy mode feels a little too easy. I think I encountered 3 enemies total the entire game. Whereas on normal mode, I was getting a lot more. I was getting a lot more thrown at me. Easy also just, the other thing, it just dumped resources on me all the time. Like, too many healing items. It was a total breeze if you just want to see like what a quick run through the game is. It might be a game that gets a lot better on harder difficulties. I could see that because easy felt a little too lax on basic challenge. Kind of boring too. I don't think there was a single enemy in the first zone that I went through. Like, it was weirdly just kind of boring. But yeah, Arcticide, meh. Probably not for me. Could be for you. Check it out if it sounds like it could be. Unfortunately, there's another one that I wanted to like. I thought it looked really cool. It's called Dreamcore. Dreamcore is a game that's based off of the Liminal Spaces trend, style, whatever you want to call it, the meme. Now, if you aren't familiar with liminal spaces, you probably don't go on the internet that often, and I salute you. There's a great video by a YouTuber named Solar Sands, who I would probably say kicked off this entire fascination with this trend. And I really like his videos on liminal spaces. I found myself very engrossed by it. And I think a lot of people would say that it's passé at this point, or it's overdone. I agree that it's overdone, but it is, I think, undeniably, I do find it very compelling and interesting. And if there was anything that wanted to do something cool with that concept, I would be down for it, There's a lot of garbage based on Slender Man, but I do love Marble Hornets. Unironically great horror series, Hey, if it's good, I don't mind if it's a little overplayed at this point. Liminal spaces are essentially places that you have been in passing. Places like that have been you never stayed long enough to be familiar with. So oftentimes in your childhood, it's places that you have memories of, but kind of hazy ones. And it's taken off because there's this kind of combined sense of, there's a creepy aspect to it, but a kind of nostalgic one as well. There's photos of places where it's difficult to place where they are, to place them in space or in reality. Real place is just the way they're taken, the times that they're taken, the lighting of them. They just have an eerie vibe to them. And I think that it's cool, right? I do like looking at it. This is the back rooms as part of this, which immediately got absorbed into fucking, I don't know, like some weird SCP. I don't know what the fuck all that stuff is about. I follow this account on Instagram that re-uploads clips from Built by Gamers, that weird fake podcast. I love those guys, and they start talking about like backrooms fan fiction as if it's a real thing, and I'm like, what the fuck are the kids up to? What are they doing? So there's this game, Dreamcore, is based on that. It pitched itself as a horror game with an intense atmosphere and ambiance that takes place in various liminal spaces, with puzzles to solve and all that. And I thought, oh, okay, so like a horror game with some puzzles with an interesting aesthetic. Why not? So I boot up the demo, and there is only one. Apparently there's going to be like 6 levels or maps or whatever to play from in the final build, but only one is available. It is like the pool world or whatever. And it's basically like the kind of like white square tiles that you'd find at like the changing room of a pool or something. And the whole world is just completely indoors, and it's just made up of that. Oh, and I should mention that the game has a filter on it, I suppose. It's supposed to be like a hand cam or body cam is what they described it as. So there's a kind of VHS shakiness, like filter and shakiness to it. There is cool effects with the way that the light kind of, like if you're in a dark room or a dark part of the game and there's a light in the distance, it'll just like the exposure will just get blown out, right? That stuff's cool. I think visually that stuff's neat. So I start walking and you're just kind of tossed in here. There's like, you walk to one room, there's like a drawing on the wall of like a radio, and you're like, okay, well, let's keep walking. Let's see. It's probably a puzzle thing, right? And then I just keep walking, and I walk through a couple rooms, and each one of them has like 2 doors or like a staircase that leads up or down. multiple exits and entrances. And I'm thinking, wow, this place might be kind of difficult to navigate around. And then I walked for 20 minutes straight and never saw the same room twice. And I was like, this is too big. It is way too big for a game that apparently has a goal. It does. I looked it up. There is a way to beat the level, and there is apparently like a monster, but I never found it. I never found anything, actually. I wandered around in this game. How much time did I spend? I wandered around in this game for 40 minutes, and I never found anything. There's like variety in the layouts of the rooms, and like they aren't just copy pastes, right? They are actually. I was thinking at one point, is this game procedurally generated? Like I was really trying to tell if I was seeing repeated patterns or things, and I don't think it is. I think it's all handmade. There's certain things of like points of interest, like, oh, I walk into one room and there's like a pool with a cross in the middle of it. There's these kind of like giant smiley balls that are, I don't know, I guess it's like a Brad Taste in Music stream. That are like kind of creepy, and they definitely like move. But they're meant to be like, they move and they look at you, and then you look at them and they don't move anymore. And that's it. Or you'll be walking down a hallway and there'll be something at the end and you'll see it move out of the way. And then you get to the end of the hallway and you just look right around the corner and there's just a big smiley ball sitting there. And it's like, it's kind of creepy. A little. This game does have, it sucks because there is like an atmosphere to it. And there are like, the visuals are kind of compelling. It's a cool visual style in a lot of ways. But just like, nothing happened. Just nothing ever happened. And I don't know if like, at a certain point, I feel like if I'm wandering around your game for 40 minutes and I never encounter anything, I think maybe you could work on like giving the player a little bit more direction or introducing them to concepts a little quicker, so that I actually know what I'm supposed to be doing. I looked up what I'm supposed to be doing. There's like a radio that has a flashlight, and once you have the flashlight, I guess you can use it. And then you find the exit. There's literally one thing to find, and then you go to the exit. And most of the game is apparently just spent wandering. I think once you pick up the flashlight, it's supposed to spawn the monster or something. I don't know. I never found it. I never found the radio that it's supposed to be next to. All I did was walk, and I was really bored. Really bored. And if that is what if every level is going to be like that, I think I can pass. Even if I did find that stuff earlier, if the gameplay is so simple, I don't know, man. I think I'll pass on that. I might recommend it to you if you just are really into the aesthetic and you just want an ambient, like a game to walk around in. Literally just a walking simulator. If you just like the vibes, I think that this could be a cool game for you. But if you're looking for like something to actually do, which the game does have, this isn't like LSD, right? Dream Emulator, which I just made the video on, where it's just a game about walking around with no goal. And like, you know that going in, and that's kind of, and you can kind of like temper your expectations for that, and I think you can really enjoy that game once you do, and just kind of like take in the environments and the vibes and stuff. This game actually does have goals, and it is like a more traditional game. It's just boring as fuck and really simple. And I can't recommend it if you want, I don't know, like interesting things to happen. Anything beyond a meditative experience. On the other end of that, Crow Country. So Crow Country is another horror game. It is a throwback to PS1 Sega Saturn style horror games, specifically Silent Hill. There is like literally an overt Silent Hill reference in the first room of the game, with a reference to like the protagonist of Silent Hill 2. It's like there's a letter from a random character who like happens to have the same name, like James something like that. And Crow Country is a game that is about a police officer named Mara going into an abandoned theme park, which has been, so there's something shady going on. There's a creepy atmosphere, and then boom, it turns out it's a type of story that I like a lot. I love stories about humans digging and mining in the earth and finding some shit that they weren't supposed to. And there's horrifying flesh monsters who could be mutants or from the like mud monsters, who knows? And they wanna kill you. So this is a abandoned theme park in disrepair, overrun with monsters, and even worse, it's in Atlanta. Take that in for a second. So this game has like a very charming art style. It's a clear send up to Silent Hill, but it actually reminds me a lot more of Final Fantasy VII, but more round, like the in-game models. Final Fantasy VII, where they're kind of like squashed. They're kind of like squashed, kind of chibi characters. But in Crow Country, it is much more round and softer, I suppose. Another thing about this game, heads up, it was meant to be played on a controller. I do not have a controller on hand. So at first, I tried to use the keyboard controls. The keyboard controls are pretty bad. They are very awkward, and okay, this is the worst part of the game, and it's a gripe that's either minor or major depending on who you are. But I was looking at the keyboard controls, and so first of all, the game never tells you what the keyboard controls are. The button layout is purely just like all the symbols are controller buttons. I had to figure out what keys they corresponded to on my own. And there were certain buttons I could never find what they were supposed to be, and I swear I hit every single button on the keyboard. And I looked at the controls and I was like, even the ones that I know, even what I can figure out, you could have come up with a better control scheme than this for keyboards. It's essentially like you've got tank controls, which are done with your WASD. You can rotate the camera around, and then you have a couple functional buttons. You've got like A and B for accept, decline, interact, that kind of stuff. The general purpose buttons. There's a flashlight button and a button for the menu, I believe. And then there's a run button and an aim button for your gun. And aiming switches to a different control scheme. The controls are set up super weird on keyboard. Namely, so I thought it was actually kind of funny that A and B are mapped to K and L, because that's actually what I mapped those same buttons to on, like, whenever I set up an emulator. Like, that's always been my index. I'm a self-taught, like, typist. So my hand is always, my right index finger is always rested most naturally on the K key and not the J key. So that's what I always bind it to be like my A button. Rotating the camera for some reason is O and P. Really weird. What was even the menu button? It was like M or something. And then aiming was with the space bar. which actually I think would be okay. I would put and then what was the run button? I don't even know if I ever found the run button. I would put, the way that I would do it is just keep the WASD keys for movement, map the camera rotation to left and right shift. Specifically rotate left and rotate right. Keep K and L as like A and B, and then change flashlight and menu to I and O. Those are what I usually map the other two buttons, like face buttons, to when I set up my emulators. Map the run button to like, I don't know, J or semicolon or something that you can easily hit. You can actually probably map the map button to like one of the face button stand-ins, and then keep aiming on spacebar so that you can, because you got to hold the button down, and then I think that would work. It's because your thumb's going to be free to hit that. I think that could work. But as it stands, the keyboard controls are way too awkward for me to use. So I actually played this game on my leverless. Which wasn't perfect, but it was much better. It wasn't perfect because to rotate the camera, you use the right stick. Now, I don't know if the term leverless tipped you off to this fact, but there is no stick. There are no sticks on my big old box. However, I did find a workaround because hitting the aim button automatically rotates the camera to face the direction of your character. So I found a janky home solution to rotating the camera, which is something you will need to do as a regular part of gameplay to look around the environment. So with that out of the way, this demo was pretty cool. I liked it a lot. It's a very classic style of horror game with slow, kind of clunky controls, but the game is clearly designed around that. Enemies are very slow, and they take a lot of bullets. They take like 4 shots to the head to take down. And there is like manual aiming. Manual aiming and manual reloading, and all of that takes time. And there are situations where I'm like, okay, you know, I'm quite a distance away from that enemy. I'm safe. Yeah, I'm good. And then I pump like 2 or 3 shots into them, and they're getting like really close. And it's like, okay, well now it's a little more dangerous. And when they introduce, there's like one enemy in the demo who has higher health, much higher health than the other ones. And I had to take him out with a grenade, which is a thing you could pick up. Because just trying to shoot him regularly did not work, which I thought was cool. It probably did work eventually, you just need a lot of ammo for it. The other factor in that is that the camera, the angle that it's placed at, it's not always super easy to see, to like get a visual on an enemy. So you have to be a little bit closer. Plus, the game straight up tells you that being closer deals more damage with your gun, which I don't know why a gun manufacturer would make it like that, but you know, that's the rules of Crow Country. So slow-paced, kind of high-stakes gameplay where they're throwing heavy-feeling gameplay. Heavy combat is what I would describe it as. Where they're throwing these slow, tanky enemies at you, and I was a little worried because I was like, man, they're giving me a lot of ammo. And yeah, with it, if you want to shoot everything, you're going to run through it. Thankfully, if you can always go back to your car, which is at the start of the game, and refill on ammo there. But there's a limit. You can have like 16 shots total in terms of stuff that's loaded and stuff you have in reserve. And you can't take any more than that just from your car. You got to find it. So there's that broken up with, or I would say the combat kind of punctuates the regular gameplay, which is exploring the park, finding these puzzles, solving the puzzles. It's again that classic style of almost like investigative puzzle solving, where you find something that doesn't have an immediate solution, like, oh, there's an item missing from here. And on your map, there's a good map. It'll actually circle rooms with unsolved puzzles, which is very useful. So sometimes you run into a room and there's 2 or 3 things that you can't really do anything with. You're like, okay, well, I'll get everything I can from here. Leave. And then later on, you'll find, oh, here's a note that tells me about the code to this thing, or an item that I have to place here, or something like that. And you kind of go back. I don't know if there's a good term for it, but I've always called it leapfrog design, because you kind of like, it's not like a linear series of challenges. You get to an obstacle, and you can't solve it immediately. Metroidvania, hate that term. Metroidvania type games use this a lot. Metroid games use this a lot, where you get to something and you can't get past it, or you can't solve it, or you can't beat it, or whatever. So you gotta go somewhere else. You gotta go to a different room or something like that until you find the thing that is the key or the upgrade or whatever that you need. And then you double back to that room that had the thing you couldn't do before. And now you've unlocked a new progress. I like that style of gameplay. I find it pretty satisfying, and it encourages a lot of exploration. And it also generally is fun because it tends to put enough faith in the player that they can figure it out. They're going to be able to figure things out, and it rewards having a good memory and paying attention to the game, which I think is cool. I've always appreciated that stuff, and this game employs a lot of that. That is that's the style of gameplay that it's going for, which, again, I call leapfrog, because you're like leapfrogging over a problem to then come back to it later. You're not getting rid of it, you're just jumping past it. The demo took me about... How long did I spend on this? About, 102 minutes. So, let's just say an hour and a half or so. And it's pretty solid. I had a good time with it. If you're interested, it has good atmosphere. It has an intriguing mystery. You're trying to find Mr. Crow, and you don't know why. You don't know if there's some kind of personal connection between Mara and this guy who owns this theme park, which has some kind of weird illegal mining operation going on inside of it. Yeah, if you're into that style of game, or that Silent Hill kind of original, Resident Evil 1 through 3 type of gameplay and combat and the way that it feels, it's not fixed camera angles. But it has kind of a similar vibe with a camera angle that kind of obscures some information, and you have to rotate it around and stuff like that to see everything. Definitely check it out. It's really cool. Play it with a controller. Another really cool game I played, which is not a horror game, but does have a very intense aesthetic atmosphere to it, would be Children of the Sun. So Children of the Sun is a sniper puzzle game, which is a really cool concept, and it executes it in a way that I thought was pretty interesting. So the setup of Children of the Sun is, it's a little vague, and it's told to you through flashes after certain stages and all that. So you're kind of meant to piece it together over the course of the whole game, I imagine. But from what I can tell, the basic setup is that the main character is this girl who was raised in a cult, or whose father was in a cult or something, and he's dead. And for some reason, it is the fault of this cult. You don't know quite all the details yet. And she goes Joker mode and puts on this spooky mask that she makes and gets a sniper rifle. And she's out for blood. She's going to kill now. And every stage is a puzzle to kill every member of the cult, which are the only people in the game. They're the enemies, I guess, targets. It's a puzzle to kill every target in one bullet. Like, how does that work? So you take aim. You can kind of like walk back and forth along the outskirts of the area. And then you take aim and fire. And if you hit something that is like a target or has some kind of interactive element to it, like there's gas tanks that you can hit and explode, the game like time freezes, or time like starts slowing to a crawl, like bullet time, basically. Literally bullet time, because now, after impact, you then get to redirect the bullet. You get to fire it again. So you like headshot one guy. There'll be a group of 2 or 3 guys. You headshot one of them. Boom! You track the bullet as it goes. The camera follows the bullet. Hit him, big explosion of blood, and then slow down. And now you get to look around from the bullet's perspective and take aim at whatever else. Ugh. And there's certain environmental interactive things. So the gas tanks, like I mentioned. And those are important because so the run, I guess, or you basically fail out if the bullet if it doesn't make contact with anything, like it just sails off into the distance at like towards the edge of the map, or if the bullet just hits like a regular wall or something like that. If it just hits something that it just clanks against. So, but there's objects like these gas tanks, and obviously the people who will let you redirect, and those count as like targets. The gas tanks explode, you can blow people up with them. I imagine as the game goes on, there's more stuff like that to be found. So when they introduce that concept to you, it's in this scenario where there's like 2 groups of targets, and there is no way that you can hit all of them just there's 2 groups of targets, and there's like a wall or like a barrier or a hill or something in between them, and you can't shoot through it, but there is like a car parked off to the side with a visible gas tank, and you can kill like the 3 guys on the one side, go for the car's gas tank, that'll explode, and then you get an angle to the other 3 guys. There's stuff like that. The game has this really cool art style where it's low poly and it's very stylized. A lot of mostly I would describe it as like very simple colors, sort of like realistic textures, but really stylized color choices, very oversaturated at a lot of points, and kind of a sort of surreal, almost color filter over it, like really intense lighting with, even if you just look at the store page, there's like huge sunrise beams coming out over, from the distance. All the lights have kind of like a blur to them. They all have this kind of like almost like lens flare, not as intense as a lens flare, but that kind of like smear to it. This heavy all the enemies are like these weird glowing, they're like people, but they're these glowing orange figures and such. It has this kind of intense, kind of thudding, tense soundtrack that's cool. One thing I was surprised about was that just in the roughly 7 or 8, I think that's about as many as are in the demo, 7 or 8 levels, they introduced like a couple mechanics that I felt shook up the gameplay quite a bit. Like, so the first one you get is, now while the bullet is flying through the air, you can hold down the right mouse button and influence the arc of the bullet. You can't like fully, you can basically steer it, not in a full range of motion, but kind of like in a rough kind of circle around your view. You can kind of aim it a little bit if the shot doesn't quite line up. So you can kind of correct for slightly imprecise shots. And the next one was really crazy, which was that they introduced a mechanic where enemies have these glowing weak points, that like these like shimmering blue weak points on their body. That's like their head, their chest, their arm, what have you. And if you hit 2 of those, you get the ability to essentially re-fire the bullet in midair. So the same kind of like redirection that you get after you hit a target, you get to do that without hitting a target in midair, which lets you pull off trick shots that you would never be able to do without it. So, you can mark all of the targets. You can just, once you see one, you can like use your middle mouse and it'll just mark it with like a little 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So you can see all the things, including like other interactables like the gas tanks. So you can see all the things that all the targets you need to take out. And essentially the skill, the puzzle of the game is what is the proper order to even take all of these targets out in one go. It's score based, so you get more points for certain things like landing headshots, for being quick. So you get like if you get a headshot, the next target you hit will be like 2 times points. You'll get a two times multiplier, but there's like a time limit, so you have to aim quickly. And if you hit them again with a headshot, you get a 3 times multiplier in your next one, and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the stage, the game deducts points for how much time you took and how many different redirects, I guess. Every time you have to redirect the bullet after you hit a target, or you get the ability to do it in midair, it counts that as a shot. So how many shots you had to take, it deducts points based on that. So there is a theoretical like maximum or like minimum or maximum score, I guess, for this for the game, like the fastest possible, taking the least amount of shots for every stage. It's fun. It's a cool puzzle game with a unique aesthetic. I was curious to learn about, maybe like some of the other background that's going on, but it's kind of like more so for the gameplay. The gameplay and the tone, the atmosphere, really what sells this on me. It's satisfying to figure out because there's some very tricky stages in the demo, and it was satisfying to figure out how to actually connect all these different targets and thread the needle on certain things. There's certain interactable elements that I wasn't aware of. So I think like the second or third stage, it says it's called like bullets that burn or bullets that hurt. And there's this big bonfire in the center. And I ended up pathing the bullet through the bonfire and it lit it on fire. And the title of the stage popped up underneath and it got like crossed out, like it was a secret objective that I completed. So I imagine there's probably, maybe even in the other stages in the demo, there was stuff like that, these secret objectives that I just totally missed, because I only really played them once. So there's lots of cool stuff that they could expand on and hide in the game. I'm curious actually how many more mechanics they're going to throw in the whole thing, because I already felt like it was decently fleshed out for a little experience with the 2 extra things they added on with the bullet redirection. And there were some pretty tricky puzzles using them. But Children of the Sun, that was a cool one. It was a winner out of this Next Fest. We got 2 more? Yeah, we got 2 more. I guess I'll start off with Moduwar? I thought it was Moduwar. Apparently it's pronounced Moduwar. because it's about these things called Modus. This one's cool. It just didn't work. It seems like it could be cool. It just didn't work. Moduwar, Moduwar, is essentially the idea is an RTS game, except your base and your units are all one like squid creature monster that you expand and grow. So you've essentially got your home unit, which is the heart of the Modu is what these creatures are called. And then you can use, I don't know, resources. I couldn't quite tell. You basically build out tiles from your Modu's heart unit to those are essentially like spaces that you can then build other growths and organs and appendages on. So in the tutorial, which is the only part that I could get to work, unfortunately, you build like cell tiles from your heart, and then you grow mouths on them, and the mouths let you do like basic melee damage. You can grow like turrets on them. There's like mortars, all sorts of different like bio-organic weaponry, essentially, like a monster where all these different things that it grows to like adapt and change to its environment. Apparently there's some kind of resource collection. I don't know. The tutorial didn't cover that. And you can move around the whole time. You're not like stuck in place. It's all this creature that can move around through the water. It's a cool concept. I looked at the screenshots. The tutorial was interesting. Unfortunately, I just got to the second stage and it literally just crashed. I could not stop it from crashing. I tried it a couple times. I didn't really look up any fixes. I don't know if they're out there. They could be. Maybe you'll have more luck than me if this sounds like an interesting idea, but I couldn't get it to work. And I even really liked how the first stage ended, where essentially the Modu is being recruited. It's being used to fight against aliens from deep space. And so you're being like recruited by this military whatever, like sci-fi Earth stuff going on. Far future military sci-fi Earth stuff. And the character who greets you, like there's a text box, but the portrait is a real guy. It's like, it's so 90s. It's literally a guy who clearly is from like the maybe Swedish, I don't know. He has some kind of European accent. I'm too American to recognize what specifically it is. And he's literally just on a green screen talking to you with this really goofy prosthetic, like sci-fi prosthetic thing on his face to be like, whoa, techno. I found that really charming. And then unfortunately the game just didn't work, which sucks. But the concept is neat. Maybe you can get it to work, but I sure couldn't. Another game with a cool concept that actually did work, and this is going to be the last one of the podcast. Geneforge 2, Infestation. So this is a sequel to a game I've never heard of. It's by a developer named Spiderweb Software, who actually have quite... Oh my god, they have a lot of games. A lot of games to their name. Geneforge 3 from 2005. Oh, are these old games? Are these like remakes? What are these? Something called Avernum Geneforge Saga. What the heck is this? Maybe I should look this up before I'd never heard of this. Hold up. Geneforge series. Yeah, Geneforge 1 Mutagen. A series of demoware role-playing video games released by Jeff Vogel of Spiderweb Software for Windows and Mac OS. There are 5 games. Are these remakes? I'm really curious about this now. I can't see anything that about what what does the store page have to say? Because this one's called Geneforge 2 Infestation. Is this I don't see anything about if this is a remake or something. What is this? Because it doesn't. I knew that it was like kind of retro, but Geneforge 2. Let's do some investigation. Infestation. Kickstarter. Oh, was this a Kickstarter game? Oh, it's a remaster of Geneforge 2. An indie cult classic. Okay. What is Geneforge? A cult classic from the distant history of its founding in 1999 series of unique and innovative role-playing games with a one-of-a-kind setting, fascinating story, and a level of open-endedness that still stands out today. Okay, so I guess this is like a remaster of an old game from 2003. That's cool. These screenshots do look a little antiquated. This is a remaster, not a remake. But it is a ground-up remaster. All right. I don't know how much, if that means totally new or just taking the original, probably not original code. Anyway, that's neat. Let's talk about what Geneforge 2 is. So basically, this is a very I was going to say it's very classic, but if it's classic, but it feels fairly modern. I think it's aged actually pretty well. The graphics are in a very old computer RPG, isometric RPG style. It's a top-down isometric CRPG that takes place in this pretty cool fantasy world where the main, how would I describe this? The government, I suppose, from what I was able to glean. There's humans, and then there is a whole sect of these magical wizards called Shapers. The reason it's called Geneforge is because the Shapers are able to create monsters. They can literally create these magical creatures to do their bidding. And the Shapers are like the main religion of the land, and they let the regular humans govern themselves, but they reserve the right to step in and exercise their power. There's there's some kind of dystopian undertones to some of the lore entries that you find, that I was able to find in the demo. It's essentially, there's 3 different classes. I don't know if the storyline changes depending on the class you pick, because it seemed fairly specific to the one that I picked, which was a Shaper, because I thought it was the most interesting sounding one. You also get the option to be in what they call like an agent, which is like a assassin, like a melee assassin type. The Shaper is more of a caster, and then there's one like Guardian, which is kind of like a tank, I suppose. I picked a Shaper because that seemed the coolest one to me, especially for the theme of the game. And basically the premise, the hook of the game is that you've got this fairly solid CRPG combat system that's kind of tile-based. Encounters play out just in the regular world, and you have lots of options to choose from, and you can position yourself. It's got kind of a blend of like XCOM combat, actually, where you have a certain number of action points per character, and certain things will use up action points, and you can move to different tiles that will also expend those. The twist is that you can create monster servants. So it isn't like fully like Spore level of customization, but you have the option to create up to 7 party members, excuse me, who are all like these monsters. There's like, I want to say 20 different ones that you can unlock from what I could tell from the menu. And when you make them, you can essentially, you have this resource called Essence, which is like sort of like the clay, like the magical clay you use to shape these monsters as a Shaper. and you get to choose upgrades and abilities that they get. So you get to like customize, does one have more damage? How much like health do I want to invest in it? What abilities do I want it to have access to? And stuff like that. And you can use a certain, I only got to the point where I could make 2 monsters for my party. Because they cost a certain amount of essence, and as you level up, your essence capacity increases as well. And while you have them summoned, they like take up that amount. They basically reserve that amount for themselves. So you literally just have them out and about, and in a very kind of Icewind Dale or Ultima 7 kind of way, they just follow you as your main character walks around, and the pathing is pretty good. I was a little worried about the AI, but the pathing is solid. I don't know if it holds up with 8 party members, but hey, at least for 2, it worked out okay. And it's kind of cool to just be walking around with your monsters. Essentially, your goal, the setup for the plot, and apparently this game is big and it feels big. You're walking, you're on a journey, you're being a kind of assisted, or your guide is an agent who is kind of like your guard and is much more experienced than you. Her name is Shanti, and you're going to visit a Shaper settlement called Dry Root or something, which is basically a failed settlement that was started by a bunch of Shapers who were trying to basically take this desert area and make it habitable by most life. So create plants and animals to thrive in the area and vegetate it, They have failed miserably, and you're trying to see why. You're here to like deliver a message from your Shaper overlords and see what's going on. So you get there, you talk to the head Shaper. It seems like something's amiss. And Shanti doesn't quite trust him, so she says, "Hey, why don't you poke around a little bit?" So you explore. There's a lot of detail in the environments. A lot of like little, pretty dense layouts. Lots of rooms to go in and things to find. NPCs walking around. It feels pretty lively and well like inhabited. The NPCs have a little dialogue that pops up over their heads when they're talking. It's nice. I would basically just call it's like a really solid. I didn't get any big twists. I don't know if I even finished the demo. I don't think I did. I basically got to a point where it felt like I kind of had to grind, and I was like, okay, I've seen enough for now. But the story is fairly intriguing. There's a lot of interesting things about the world, namely because they introduce a lot of... Already they're introducing questions about the ethics of being a Shaper and having absolute control over like regular non-magic people. You have the ability... Shapers are allowed to just go into people's homes. That's just the thing that they're allowed to do. There's questions about the ethics of how they treat their servants, the monsters, because they... Like, one of the first things you find is, like, a whip. And the whip is literally, the description is that, like, oh, when they get out of line, you gotta get them back in. There's a character who you talk to that taps on, like, a kind of dark part of the setting, which is the idea that she basically takes care... She's, like, basically almost like a caregiver or a stable hand for the monsters. And she introduces the idea of, what do they call them? Intonio or something like that. Basically, there are monsters, like sometimes when the Shapers are creating the creatures, the monsters come out special needs, essentially. That's what they're describing. They don't like have they have this word for it that's like a fantasy word, but they're basically special needs. And they just like, well, they have like behavioral problems, or they aren't very effective and all that, or so the way they describe it is it's very clear that this is a metaphor for like people with special needs, like really intense Asperger's and stuff like that. And the way that this society has tried to deal with it, apparently they used to just kill them. And at one point it was decided that was kind of inhumane or like immoral. And so they kind of just have to like find ways to put them to use. They've brought these life forms into this world. And there's like a clash between seeing them as completely just utilities to do your bidding, or things that deserve some degree of like dignity and fair treatment. And I think at one point, like one of the dialogue options you get is, do you think it's kind of immoral to be whipping the servants? And the stable lady, she says, she looks kind of like, the text describes her being, excuse me, kind of concerned for a second, like getting kind of like a weird look on her face, and then kind of laughing and saying, fair shaper, you've of course not. I see that you're trying to test my loyalty to your institution. And she's, and it says like the look on her face suggests that you've just said something kind of dangerous. That the idea that your creations deserve some kind of, fair treatment, or not to be fucking whipped when they don't work hard enough is a little weird. That's kind of challenging. It's rocking the boat a little bit. You're like, oh, okay. There's some interesting ideas that are brought up. I don't know how it executes on them, but I'm at least fascinated by the world enough to be interested in where this goes. This is actually kind of cool, finding out that this is a remaster of a classic game, because I don't know, I think it's cool to shine a light on stuff like that. Definitely a game with a lot of promise. The combat is really smooth, I have to say. You're just walking around until you encounter an enemy and they get kind of aggroed to you, at which point it is a grid. It's a tile-based game, but you can't really tell it. It's very, very cleverly kind of smoothed out with the way that the characters are able to kind of exist on anywhere on the tile, essentially. Like it isn't very rigid. But as soon as the combat starts, the tile, like the grid pops up around all the characters involved, like you and your party and any enemies. So it's not just like absolutely dominating the screen, this grid of every single tile of the world, but just enough that you can tell, like judge rough distances between things. And then entering and exiting combat is very smooth. It just, you kill them and then just hit the button to leave combat mode if there's no other enemies around. I don't know. It's a solid classic isometric CRPG with good feeling gameplay, and an interesting story and world that it's setting up, and some neat twists. Namely in the creature creation, that you're literally designing the stats and the attributes of your party members, which is actually like a cool idea for an RPG. That you can like balance your own team. You can come up with your own team composition. I think that's a cool idea. But yeah, Geneforge 2 Infestation. The demo is pretty meaty. You'll get a couple hours out of it, probably like 1 or 2 at least. How much did I spend? 107 minutes, and I don't even think I finished it. So, thumbs up to that one. Let's see. Would I say there were more good or bad ones? Let me just go from the top to round up this episode. Arcticide. It was okay. Children of the Sun is a thumbs up. Crow Country, thumbs up. Dreamcore, thumbs down. Geneforge 2, thumbs up. Indika, thumbs up. Moduwar, I don't know. Sunray, I don't know. Yeah, I would say it was pretty strong. Like half of them were games that I would totally give the recommend to. Some of them I have some caveats, and one of them I didn't like. And one of them didn't work. So, yeah, always love Steam Next Fest. I'm looking forward to the next one that they put on. And my throat is tired, and I'm hungry. So, I'm going to call it a day here. We didn't have any questions last time. So, I will open the floor to anyone who wants to ask. If you have a question, please leave it in the comments below. But phrase it in the form of a question, because I'm not just going to read your thoughts out loud. Thank you so much for listening. Starting work on the next video. Cool stuff coming down the line. Unrelated to that, actually. Subscribe and do whatever and yada yada. Bye.